This coming Sunday is our Mother's Day celebration. So we're going to take a little break from our series in Reframing Jesus to celebrate our moms. So we encourage you to come. We have a photo booth we'll be setting up. It's already been built. It's sitting out there. We're ready to bring it in next Sunday. And we're going to have a lot of fun celebrating moms together. So I encourage you to join us for our celebration next week. Today, however, we do continue our series. Wait for it. There it is. It's here. Reframing Jesus. So today we are continuing our series. I have a confession to make as we get started. I am a natural-born skeptic. I wouldn't say I go as far as saying I'm cynical. I'm not really a cynic, but I am skeptical, especially of those things that seem too good to be true. I've shared before that this is the reason I have never purchased a lotto ticket. It's because I just don't believe in my chances. I mean, ethical implications aside, I just have a hard time believing that I have a good chance of winning. Likewise, I'm not likely to respond to a solicitation for a free trip to some beautiful island because I was picked at random. I'm just not that guy. And the same is true of late night infomercials. Y'all remember the Ginsu knives? Right? It slices, it dices. Well, it just might, but I'm not willing to make 6 easy payments in $19.95 to find out if it does, even if it does come with a full money-back guarantee. This week at our pastor's retreat, I went away with, there were 9 of us, pastors from gospel-preaching churches here in the city of Renton, all from different denominations, different groups, but we all believe in the gospel of Jesus Christ, and we gathered for a few nights over near Cleolum to seek the Lord together. And one night we went out for dinner, and the place we were eating at had the Impossible Burger. You ever heard of that? The Impossible Burger. Neither had I. It's a vegan burger, no meat, but it supposedly tastes like a real hamburger. That's why they call it the Impossible Burger. Actually, the reason they call it the Impossible Burger is because they were out of it at this restaurant, so I guess it really was impossible. But that's a pretty big promise to make, right? That a vegan burger can taste like a real hamburger. Along the same lines, I'm not a big fan of books that make huge promises. Like the author who promises to make you a millionaire overnight, or 5 easy steps to the perfect body, or the 7 secrets for a successful life. There are 7? That's good to know. However, having said all of this, once in a while, something that seems too good to be true isn't. Isn't that true? Occasionally, something promoted as really great turns out to be really great. I'll give you one example. Deb and I came to Renton Bible from Minnesota, the land of 10,000 lakes. Now, when I was a kid, I did a little fishing, but I always thought fishing was boring. I think a lot of kids feel that way, sitting there with a pole in your hand is just boring. I went to Minnesota, and lo and behold, I fell in love. I got hooked on fishing, and I really enjoyed it. And so I came back here to the Pacific Northwest. I remember chatting with a few people about fishing around here, and I got the same report from a handful that said, oh, there's no fishing over here. You got to go to the east side or somewhere else. But then my buddy Greg Grant said, you come fishing with me, we'll catch 30 fish, guaranteed. I said, oh, okay. So I, of course, tried him out, and guess what? It wasn't too good to be true. He was right. We caught 30 fish. Lake Sammamish, I believe it was our first trip, but Lake Washington, Lake Sammamish, there are fish out there. So sometimes that which seems too good to be true actually may be true. And today I'd like to talk to you about something that we find in God's Word that may at first seem too good to be true. But I'm here to tell you, it's not too good to be true. It is true. And I begin by reading Jesus' words from the middle of John 15, where he says, I am the vine. You are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Let me ask you this question. Doesn't that sound good? bearing much fruit. Who doesn't want to bear much fruit, to have a fruitful life? But the question is, can we believe Jesus here? I'm not talking about belief as merely nodding our heads, because we can all nod our heads and say, oh, that sounds good, amen. I'm talking about a belief that moves us to action, that changes the way we live. Do we believe Jesus' promises in John 15 enough to act upon them? As you contemplate that question, I invite you to take your sermon outlines from your bulletins titled, I Am the True Vine. If you didn't receive one of these, Dan Johnson, would you be so gracious? That's the problem with sitting towards the front and the inside aisle. If you didn't receive one of these, would you raise your hand, and Dan will make sure that you get one of them. And I invite you to turn your Bibles to John chapter 15. What we find at the beginning of the 15th chapter of John is the seventh and final I am statement of Christ. Specifically, what he says is, I am the true vine. This statement takes place in the upper room. I think it's important to remember not only where this conversation takes place location-wise, but where it takes place in Jesus' ministry the night before his arrest. Why is that important? Listen to the introduction of Bruce Wilkinson's little book titled The Secrets of the Vine. This is what he writes. Have you ever been with someone very close to you who is about to die? Someone who loves you and wants to leave you with a final word. Come closer. You lean close, straining to hear. I want to tell you something. I've waited until now, but I can't wait any longer. You know that you'll remember every word for the rest of your life. Now imagine that the person who is about to speak is Jesus. How closely would you listen? How long and hard would you ponder your Lord's last words to you? In the pages to come, I invite you to encounter, perhaps for the first time, Jesus' words in John 15, the heart of his final message to his disciples on the night he was betrayed. By dusk the following day, Jesus would be stretched out on a cross, his body stripped and pierced, his life ebbing away. Jesus knew the words he spoke that night would echo in his friends' memories for years. In time, the truth of his deathbed conversation would lead them to a whole new way of thinking. These final words are so little understood today that I've called them, and he calls them in his book, secrets. But he says, I'm convinced that Jesus meant for their meaning to be clear. The time for parables and hidden meanings had passed. He wanted every follower for generations to come to know exactly how to live an overflowing life and understand what God would do to make that happen. An overflowing life. Does that sound appealing to you? And this isn't the first time that Jesus makes this promise. John chapter 10, Jesus refers to it as life to the full, life abundant. The teaching we find in John chapter 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17, we call this the upper room discourse. It's Jesus taking what he's talked about in parables before the crowds and driving it home for the disciples. This is it. This is his final teaching. And there are a few important messages he is compelled to communicate before his arrest. At the heart of these very important messages in John 13 through 17 is today's message, John 15, 1 through 8. I invite you to follow along as I read today's passage. Jesus says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself, it must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine. You are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not remain in me, he is like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be given you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. Rich promises are made in this passage. And even though it's only 8 verses long, there is a lot to unpack. And so for this reason, we're not doing it all today. It's going to be at least a 2 Sunday sermon, if not 3, we'll see. And actually, we'll end up taking a break next week because of our Mother's Day celebration. We'll get back to it the week after that. But part of what makes these 8 verses in need of unpacking is that Jesus uses a very interesting analogy to make his points. The problem is, it's an analogy that, though familiar, it's not one that most of us can relate to. There are a few vineyard owners here. Few of us have actually raised vines ourselves. Even so, most of us are able to at least visualize what Jesus is describing. And again, I turn to Bruce Wilkinson for a great picture of what we see here. He says, are pictures coming to your mind? Can you feel the ragged bark, the curl of a tendril, the fuzzy surface of new leaves? Can you smell the spicy sweetness of the grapes? Jesus loved to convey the deepest truths with simple, earthy examples. In his last message before his death, he wanted you and me to comprehend with our whole being that he has left us on this planet for one compelling reason, and it has everything to do with fruit. Think about it. All throughout John, we've seen pictures of very basic earthy things. Wine for a wedding celebration. A woman drawing water from a well. Even the washing of dirty feet after a day of walking in sandals. These are earthy images. And so it's not surprising that Jesus should use something so earthy to convey what it means to live the Christian life. What he describes for us here is life in the vine. Now remember, the point of all of this is that we bear fruit to God's glory. We're going to be looking at this throughout this sermon, these sermons in John 15, but the first thing we need to understand about a fruitful life is this. Jesus is the true vine. Listen again, if you would, to Wilkinson's description of this first point. Jesus is the vine. If you didn't grow up in wine country, you might think that the vine is a long, trailing limb that sprawls along the trellis. Is that the picture you're getting of the vine? Actually, it's the trunk of the plant that grows out of the ground. Vineyard keepers traditionally keep the vine at waist height, 36 to 42 inches. The vine ends in a large gnarl from which branches grow in either direction along the trellis. And so this is an important distinction that he brings out. The vine is not these things that you see right here. Those are the branches. The vine is the stump that grows up out of the ground from which the branches come. And so Jesus begins by saying, I am that stump. I am the vine. Deb and I went on a walk last week at Kubota Gardens. How many of you, just out of interest, have ever gone to Kubota Gardens? Raise your hand. Just a few of you. It's surprising to me how many people don't know about Kubota Gardens, because 2 things I love. I love free, and I love beautiful gardens. And it's a beautiful garden. It's like a poor man's Japanese garden. It has beautiful trees. It's actually a Seattle City Park. A lot of Japanese maples and little bridges. It's really a great place to go on a walk. I will warn you, however, though, the aromas there are quite often strong, not from the trees. So I encourage you, go in the morning when people aren't out there using it for other things. One tree Deb and I looked at while we were there was this awesome tree. Actually, we saw the branches out in front, but I had to go look and see what was behind it. And when I stepped behind the branches, because it was high up, I saw it looked like a trail, and all of a sudden, switchbacks, that's what I'm looking for. It looked like a trail with switchbacks. This rugged trunk that was coming out of the ground. was all zigzags, and you could tell this was an old tree. It had been growing there a long, long time. And when you think of Jesus as the vine, this is really the picture that you need to think about. It's this trunk that is substantial, that is strong enough to hold branches. Jesus is actually the thick, hardy trunk out of which the branches grow. You cannot help but think here of pictures we see of the vine regarding Israel. Look at how Jesus describes himself again there in verse 1. I am the true vine. Can I just say, there are a lot of counterfeit vines. There are a lot of counterfeits that are inviting us to plant ourselves in them. A lot of counterfeits that say, if you come to me, I will give you life. I'll bring you joy. I'll give you abundance. Jesus says, I am the true vine. Now, he is specifically speaking here in reference to Israel. And actually, there are many passages in the Old Testament that refer to Israel as a vine. One of which is Psalm 80. And I want to read to you Psalm 80, verses 7 through 19. This is what we read. Restore us, O God Almighty. By the way, this is a psalm of lament, which means things are bad, and they want God to restore them, to bring restoration. Restore us, O God Almighty, verse 7. Make your face shine upon us, that we may be saved. You brought a vine out of Egypt. You drove out the nations, and you planted it. You cleared the ground for it, and it took root and filled the land. The mountains were covered with its shade, the mighty cedars with its branches. Again, this is Israel. They're the ones that God brought out of Egypt and planted in the promised land. The mountains were covered with its shade, the mighty cedars with its branches. It sent out its boughs to the sea, its shoots as far as the river. Why have you broken down its walls, so that all who pass by pick its grapes? Boars from the forest ravage it, and the creatures of the field feed on it. Return to us, O God Almighty. Look down from heaven and see. Watch over this vine, the root your right hand has planted, the son you have raised up for yourself. Your vine is cut down, it is burned with fire. At your rebuke the people perish. Let your hand rest on the man at your right hand, the Son of Man you've raised up for yourself. Then we will not turn away from you. Revive us, and we will call on your name. Restore us, O Lord God Almighty. Make your face shine upon us, that we may be saved. So first we see this picture of Israel as a vine that is verdant, that is healthy, that is fruitful. But then this vineyard is said to have broken down walls so that anyone passing by can take the grapes, and wild boars can trample it. Most of the many analogies of Israel to a vine that are found in the Old Testament are focusing on a vine that has failed, that is not bearing fruit. And that is the theme that Jesus picks up in the New Testament as well. It's what we read here in Luke chapter 13, verses 6 and 7. He said, we read, then he told this parable. A man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he went to look for fruit on it, but did not find any. A fruitless fig tree is worthless. Now Jesus is talking about Israel right here. He is revealing here that Israel is an unfruitful vine. Now, if you're reading through Genesis, if you're in our Life on Life challenge, you've been going through Genesis and you've been seeing that God's plan for his people is not just for them to be blessed, but he wants to bless all nations through them. And here Jesus is saying that God's people Israel failed to receive the blessing that God wants to give them and to be a blessing as God wants to use them. Jesus is talking about Israel here. He is in Psalm 80, however, the son you've raised up for yourself. He is the man at your right hand, the Son of Man you've raised up for yourself. In Psalm 80, as we see throughout the Old Testament and into the New Testament, Israel has failed, but God's plan for them has not failed. You see, God still has a plan. the sending of his Son who would come from his right hand, who would bring salvation. And that Son is referred to as the true vine, or in the Old Testament, he is the stump of Jesse, the root of Jesse. So if Jesus the Son is the true vine, what does that make the Father? According to verse 1, it makes him ahead of myself, here we go. The Father is the vine dresser. Now the word here used is actually most literally just farmer. It means farmer. But when we think of a farmer, we think of a guy in overalls who is driving a tractor. That's not the picture here. This is a vine dresser. That's what kind of farmer this is. So that's why the language is used in our text. It is the Father, the farmer, who tends the vine that is grounded in Jesus the Son. Yet again, we see this picture of Jesus' submission to the Father within the Godhead. We continue in verse 2. And I'm still in Psalm 80. There we go. John 15, verse 2. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. So here is the role of the Father, to dress the vine, to prune, to cut away dead wood. And for what purpose? Fruitfulness. After the last big storm we had, I went out to one of the trees in my backyard and did some serious pruning. It's a palmatum tree. It's a Japanese variety. I love palmatums. They're a maple, but with usually smaller leaves. But I went through, I had so much deadwood on that thing. And you know how you can tell? You can tell the deadwood even before leaves start sprouting, because if there are no leaves, you know it's dead. But even before leaves start coming, you can tell the deadwood because it's gray. It's got this gray color to it. Now, the wood that's alive has a reddish tint. So I chopped away, I cut off all of the dead branches. It took me a while. But this is the job of the vine dresser. First job one, is to cut away dead branches. I mentioned a few weeks ago the cedar I took from my backyard. And by the way, I love cedars. I have a handful of them growing around my property right now, because cedars beget cedars. And they love to just sprout up in the funniest places. So I told you about the fact that I'd taken a cedar from my backyard, I planted it in the back here, and I shared with you that I didn't do anything to make it grow. I mean, I did about all the things that you would do wrong. First of all, I bare rooted it, which means there was no ball that had the roots intact and the soil that it was growing in. I did nothing to amend the soil back there. It's almost laughable to call it soil. If you go back, it's more like rock. But I did nothing to amend the soil. I dug a hole just big enough to plop it in, mainly because it was so hard I couldn't dig it anymore. So I just dug just enough to get the thing in there. I stuck it in there. I didn't water it a bit. You're supposed to water in a tree. I didn't water in this tree. I just said, God, bless this tree. I mean, I really didn't care too much. It was a volunteer. And so I thought, well, if it grows, it grows. If not, it won't. Sometimes I do that. Surprisingly, in spite of my lack of care, this tree has survived. Now, I would not say that it's thrived. If I had cared for it, if I had made a root ball and I dug out the hole deep and put in some new soil and watered it in, it would probably be a lot healthier and stronger. Honestly, I didn't care too much about this tree, so I didn't care too much for it. This is not true of the Father. The Father is the very opposite of that example of that tree. The Father cares for the vine. He works diligently on the vine so that it will be healthy and strong. If a branch is dead, he cuts it off to keep it from stealing the nutrients to the healthy branches. He just removes it. I invite you to turn with me for a moment to Matthew 7. There's a little bit of a story there that we see Jesus talking again about what happens to those who are without fruit. Matthew chapter 7, beginning in verse 15, this is what we read. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus by their fruit you will recognize them. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons and perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. Now, it's interesting as an aside how often those who are said to be cast into hell away from God are because they did not know him. See, we often think of religion as a list of do's and don'ts, and so we bring that to Christianity. We just do this, we just do that. But for Jesus, over and over and over again, it's about relationship. Do you know him? Nonetheless, we see yet again this picture of dead wood that is cast into the fire because it is worthless. The point of this passage is simple. Just because someone says they are a Christian does not mean they belong to Christ. Do you want to get an idea of where someone's at spiritually? According to this passage, how do you figure out where they're at spiritually? You look at their fruit. Not what they say, not how big of a Bible they carry, not how much they talk about Jesus. You look at their fruit. Is there fruit in their lives? Jesus says, thus by their fruit you will recognize them. Now we have to be careful here. First of all, even true disciples of Christ sin. Right? We talked about it for the Lord's Supper today. So you can't come at this with a legalistic attitude. Well, you sin, so you obviously don't belong to Jesus. That would be a false way to look at what Jesus is describing. But the point that he makes is that if a person's life shows little signs of spiritual fruit, they may not belong to Christ. Even if you go to church every Sunday. If you are unfruitful, then you might be practicing empty religion. The first time I preached through this passage, we were living in Marshall, Minnesota. Marshall, Minnesota, southwest corner of Minnesota. Now, Minnesota is not traditionally conceived of as being part of the Bible Belt, but having grown up in Oregon on the West Coast, it felt very Bible Belt to me. Like everybody goes to church. Everybody is a part or affiliated with some church in Marshall, Minnesota. At least it feels that way. In fact, I remember there was a Lutheran pastor who was chatting with me one time about a church planter. Now, I can tell this Lutheran pastor was not fond of the idea of someone coming in from out of town and planting a church in Minnesota. And he was speaking negatively about this church planter, and he was actually kind of mocking him, saying, oh yeah, he did a study that showed that most people here are not following Jesus, are not Christian. And the Lutheran said, hey, I have, and he gave me some percentage. This many percent of people belong to a church in Marshall, Minnesota. And now here's the thing. The difference between the two is the mainline church pastor was thinking of affiliation. Well, I'm affiliated with the church, so I'm part of the church, I'm a Christian. I'll give you a little clue that when you grow up in a place like Marshall, Minnesota, or somewhere in the Bible Belt, everyone is affiliated with the church. Everyone says, well, I'm part of this church. Even if they've never gone there before, or just go there once a year on Christmas, or maybe twice a year at Easter as well, call those CE Christians. Even if they're just CE Christians, they're still affiliated with the church. But the church planter, in his mind, his thoughts are, if you are not a regular part of a church, if you're not growing in Christ and serving alongside his people, then you're part of the people I want to reach. And so we see this conflicting narrative of what it means to be a Christian. I will tell you, however, that what we see in Jesus' instruction is that it is not about what you profess to be a part of or profess to believe. It's about how you live. It's about whether or not you're pursuing Jesus on a daily basis. Not just when things get bad. Not just when you go through a crisis and all of a sudden you turn to God in prayer. It's every day. Is he a part of your life? And are you bearing fruit for him? As we talked about last week, Jesus is not interested in fans. He calls us to be followers. Jesus has no interest in more fans. He wants those who are following him. It's not religiosity that matters. It's a life that bears fruit. But one question that arises here is just, who is represented by this dead wood? Jesus refers to this dead wood as those who are in him. Look at verse 2 again, because this creates a little bit of a theological conundrum. Verse 2, he cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit. Now here's the question. If it's a branch that is in him that bears no fruit, that is cut off, and by the way, a few verses later, we're going to find where that broken branch goes, into the fire. So is Jesus saying that people who are actually in him, who've been saved, are then cut off and thrown into the fire? I don't think that's what he's saying. And so here's the thing you need to remember about analogies, is analogies always break down at some point, right? You use an analogy, eventually it's going to break down. And I don't think what Jesus is trying to say here is that these people who were truly a part of him. What he's talking about is those who say they're part of him, who say they're followers of him. And he had a lot of people in the crowd who were following him, who were saying, rah, 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 Jesus, as long as he kept giving them free food, right? Feeding of the 5,000. As long as he kept doing miraculous signs that were really cool to watch, the people were hip on following him. But you know what Jesus did? What did he do is over and over again, he kept doing things to say, hey, are you sure you want to follow me? Again, we talked about last week, Jesus was the anti-PR guy. I mean, he did this is not the way you do PR, by discouraging people, by saying, no, I don't think you really want to follow me. I think you may want to go somewhere else, because I'm not sure that this is what you want to do. And I don't think he was, by the way, trying to use reverse psychology either. He really wanted to pare down those who were following him to those who were truly following him. And so we see here in verse 2 this picture. Jesus knows there are people who are amongst these crowds who aren't really following him, who aren't seeking him for him. They're seeking him only for what they think he can do for them. Jesus is not interested in those who are affiliated with his church. They are not who he's seeking. He wants followers, those who are part of his church, part of his body. So this passage serves as a warning to them, to make them question whether they really are what they say they are. As for the disciples, Jesus leaves no room for doubt. For he goes on to say, you are already clean, verse 3, because of the word I have spoken to you. What is the word he has spoken to them? It's the gospel. The disciples have embraced by faith the gospel message and are therefore clean. There's only one other place where John uses this word. Do you remember where it is? It was not too long ago. It was his word to Peter in John 13 when he washed the disciples' feet. You remember what Peter did when Jesus was washing his disciples' feet. Peter said, oh no, not me, Jesus. You're not going to wash my feet. I'll wash your feet. You're not going to wash my feet. This is the interaction we see in John 13, beginning in verse 6. He says, he came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Jesus replied, you do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand. No, said Peter, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. Then, Lord, Simon Peter replied, not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well. Jesus answered, a person who has a bath needs only to wash his feet. His whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you. For he knew who was going to betray him. And that was why he said, not everyone was clean. Now, we talked about this morning, didn't we? We see in Psalm 51, wash me and I'll be whiter than snow. Jesus saying, if I wash you, you're clean. You don't need anything more. I'm the one who makes you clean. Of course, Jesus isn't talking about feet there. He's talking about spiritual lives. He's talking about our soul. And Jesus says, I'm the one who can make you clean. And so it's the same kind of clean that Jesus talks about here again in John 15. He says, as you've embraced my word, that is the gospel, you are now clean before God. Of course, you may also remember that a few verses later, Jesus tells Judas, what you're about to do quickly, and Judas leaves. So, Jesus in John 15 says, every one of you are clean. Well, that's because Judas has left. The one he said is not clean, has already departed. Jesus' main point here is not to reproach the disciples. but to encourage them, to assure them that they do belong to Him. They are of those who bear fruit. His desire, however, is that they bear more fruit, which brings us back to this picture of life in the vine, and specifically the fact that Jesus is the true vine and that the Father is the vine dresser. How does the vine dresser do according to verse 2? Or excuse me, what does he do? He removes the dead wood, but he prunes the healthy branches so that they will bear more fruit. A few weeks ago I showed you a picture of the prune tree in my backyard. I did some intensive pruning on this prune tree, cutting it literally in half. Now, in the past, I didn't know anything about pruning trees. And so I looked up, of course, a video. Don't you love it? You need not be ignorant about anything anymore. Just go to YouTube. Give me the answer. So I looked up a YouTube video on how do you prune a prune tree. And one of the things it said I thought was very interesting is do not prune a prune tree in the middle of the summer or in the middle of the spring when it's growing season. Why? Because it hurts them. Did you know that prune trees have feelings? Well, not feelings, but actually it does them harm. If you do it in the growing season, then you're going to lose some of that life-giving sap that's going to flow out and do nothing for the prune tree. So you're not supposed to prune a prune tree. And by the way, I think it's a great picture because when Jesus prunes us, it hurts. Who likes to be pruned? I mean, I don't like it when He cuts away things in my life that are not beneficial, but that I love. And He does that. He comes along with the pruning shears, and sometimes it really hurts. But His goal is that we be more fruitful. And I've actually seen this in my prune tree in the backyard. I was out there just a couple days ago doing some power washing and some work in the backyard, and I looked at this prune tree that I had cut in half, and lo and behold, guess what I found on the prune tree? You'll never guess. Prunes. There are prunes on my prune tree. I don't think we got anything last year, or hardly anything. But there are tons of prunes, and it's because I chopped off all this wood that was sucking the nutrients that wouldn't produce prunes, so that those nutrients could go to the branches that were ready to bear fruit. And this is a beautiful picture, I think, of what Jesus does in our lives. Jesus' message to His disciples is that the Father wants them to lead fruitful lives. He wants them to bear great fruit. But for this to happen, God has to work in their lives. Again, remember that all this is against the backdrop of Jesus' soon and coming departure. He's getting ready to leave. Remember that right at the end of chapter 14, He told them, chapter 14, verses 25 and 26, Jesus says, "All this I have spoken while still with you. But the Counselor, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you all things and will remind you of everything I have said to you." Jesus' promise to them is that He, even though He's leaving, He's not leaving them as orphans. And because He's leaving, it doesn't mean the spiritual work that He's began in them is going to end. No, actually it's going to flourish because the Holy Spirit is going to come and dwell within them. And now in chapter 15, Jesus reveals that the Father will also be working in them to prune and tend the vine so that it will grow, will be more fruitful. Again, we return to Wilkinson. He says, the Father is the vine dresser. The vine dresser is the keeper of the vineyard. Either the owner or the person hired to tend it. The vine dresser's task is simple: to coax from his plants the most pounds of grapes possible. A healthy and properly tended vineyard means a higher yield. This is at the heart of the analogy of the vine. God's desire that by abiding in the vine, we will bear much fruit. And so, if you haven't already figured this out, you and I are the branches. Believers, this is better than Ginsu knives. This is better than the Impossible Burger. This is better than an all-expense-paid vacation. Why is this better? Because it is only in Jesus that we may experience a fruitful, God-blessed life. And one last quote from Wilkinson's book. It says, "You and I are the branches. In the vineyard, the branches are the focus of the vine dresser's efforts because they produce the fruit. Branches are tied to a trellis or propped up with sticks to let air circulate, to provide the maximum amount of sunshine and to allow full access for tending. The vine dresser lovingly cultivates each branch so that it will bear as much fruit as possible. This is the life abundant that Jesus promised in John 10. Here is our life purpose. We are here to fulfill God's dream, that we will bring Him glory through a remarkably abundant life. That's how we find our greatest fulfillment now and for eternity. Now, really quickly, just one aside. Jesus doesn't define abundant the way our world does. If in your minds you're thinking, money, 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 that's not what Jesus is thinking. See, abundance, Jesus has a whole different definition of what abundance looks like. We're going to talk about that more later on. But true fulfillment is not about pursuing my dreams. True fulfillment is about chasing God's dreams. And that's the irony of the whole thing. We naturally assume that the greatest blessings come through self-interest, looking out for number one, being free to do what I want. That's what our world says. Jesus' message is that greatest blessings, real fulfillment, life to the full, comes from pursuing God's dreams, God's will, God's purposes. And how do we do this? By learning to live in Christ. What does that look like? Well, you're going to have to wait until week after next. I'm sorry. I know. Didn't pay. I remember as a kid watching a TV show, and at the end it would say, "To be continued." Oh no, you have to wait a whole week. Of course, today you don't have to. You just watch the next video. But next week, this week, this is just the encouragement I want to give for you, and maybe the challenge is, what's your dream? What's the dream you're living for? Is it Jesus' dream of a fruitful life? Or is it a dream that is smaller than that? That is just focused on self-centered things or plans or human purposes? Jesus has a dream for us. And that dream is that we live fruitful lives. How? We're going to talk about that next week. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you so much for your teaching that is so rich, that is so meaningful, and so needed by us. We confess, Lord, that too often we settle for wimpy dreams, for small dreams. God, help us more and more to long for, to desire what you dream for us, to live fruitful lives that bring glory to your name. We pray this all in Christ's precious name. Amen. Amen.